Well, thank you for coming tonight. What I'd like to do is discuss something that's really important. It's a consumer's guide to science, because today we're constantly barraged with what we believe to be scientific information, and it's kind of hard sometimes to wade through that stuff. As Jeff pointed out, I teach biology for a living, and we commonly find out that many of our college students really don't have an idea what constitutes science and what is not science. And we also have found out from studies from the American Academy of Sciences, probably 15 years ago, that sometimes even people who have finished a bachelor's degree in biology or related science still can't adequately define what constitutes science. And maybe it's even more important nowadays is what isn't science, because we have Fox 17 and all those great programs out there telling you about, remember the show Unsolved Mysteries, which I used to call created mysteries, okay? So you have all this stuff out there that's masquerading as science nowadays, and you have to wonder, well, is this science? Because everything sounds very science-y. And so sometimes you have people trying to profess their viewpoints masquerading as science. But that's not the only concern, because we also have a lot of bad science being done. And you have to also be able to wade through that. Does what I'm being told really constitute good science? Is this something that I should take to heart? Because all of us are consumers of science. A little gee whiz fact I like to throw out to my students is that if we were to even look at conservative estimates, if we go back to the dawn of society and count all of the scientists that have ever lived on the planet, including all of those that are alive today, conservatively, all 95% of all the scientists that ever lived are currently living today. And you're probably comfortable with that, right? It kind of makes sense. We're in a more scientifically based society than we've ever been. And so we're constantly consumers of science. I mean, you pick up your iPod, pick up your whatever pager, everything. We talk about stem cell research. We talk about, genetic engineering. And we have to know how to wade through that stuff, both in the material coming from the scientist and the stuff coming from the pseudoscientists or the paranormal folks. So what I'd like to do with you tonight is kind of walk through what constitutes science and how to be a good consumer of science. Give you some how-tos, what to look for, what to avoid, and see how we all do it. Because you know what? Science is a hard thing to do. It's not easy. That's why they torture us for 5 to 10 years in graduate school to make sure we kind of get it right. But still, we make mistakes. So how do you go about judging what's good? What we're going to do tonight is take a look, first of all, at why am I suggesting you be so skeptical in the first place? Then we're going to talk about briefly what constitutes science, because that's important, because we want to find out what's science and what isn't. Once we decide what is science, then we want to try and evaluate, well, is it good science? How is science done? Just really briefly, is that what is the technique for science? And I just want to propose that to you so we can use that as kind of a ladder from which we can begin our discussions. And then we want to get into the main part, evaluating scientific claims. Can you do it? Hopefully after tonight's presentation, you're never going to read those great literary journals like the Grand Rapids Press or the National Weekly Globe the same way anymore. You'll be a little more skeptical than you are right now. We'll look at, is the experimental design appropriate for the question being asked? Because just doing an experiment, just doing a study, doesn't necessarily make it good science. Also, making observations. How do you do it? It's pretty easy. You just look, right? There will be a test, okay? We're going to do it. We're going to see. As you wallow out with your tail dragging between your legs and you hide in the corner, it's a lot harder than you might think. Well, then we're going to look at deduction and inference. Once you've learned how to make observations, how do you make deductions and inferences based upon those observations, assuming those observations were correct in the first place? Then we'll take a look at interpreting the data. Okay, once we've made our observations, once we've made our deductions, now how do you look at the data? How do you know what those numbers mean? And how do we know when people are telling us the truth with the data? Then we'll take a look for relationships. Is correlation the same as causation? You'd think so when you listen to the news and read the newspapers. We'll find out if really, in fact, they're the same thing. Then we'll take a look for peer review. What is peer review? Folks, if it's science, there's peer review involved. If it's good science, there's peer review involved. Then we'll take a look at using your science spam filter, okay? Now as the consumer of science, what do I need to look out for? And then we'll have a little discussion at the end there. Okay, so first of all, why be so skeptical? You say, well, what is skepticism? If we take a look at Webster's Collegiate Dictionary here, it says skepticism is the philosophical doctrine that the truth of all knowledge must always be in question, and that inquiry must be a process of doubting. That's pretty cynical and negative. Okay? You're just an old curmudgeon that says, I don't believe it. Well, not exactly. I'm also on the editorial board of Skeptic Magazine. At the Skeptic Society, we've defined skepticism a little bit differently. We say it's a provisional approach to claims, the application of reason to any and all ideas. Skepticism is a method. It's not a position. So it's not saying that I just don't believe anything you say. You can say, well, I'm conditionally skeptical. That's an extraordinary claim, but I'm willing to help you investigate it. Because the more we know about science, the more we realize that probably anything's just about possible. So we're saying, well, wow, that's a pretty amazing claim. But let's take a look and see if there's data. See, it's not a position. It's a process of approaching claims. And that's what I'm suggesting we do as consumers of science. It's not just, actually, I don't believe that. It's not congruent with my belief process. Well, let's step back and take a look at it and say, well, that's a pretty amazing claim. Is there any credence to it? Now, what constitutes science? An important thing to look at here. We say that science has to make reference to natural phenomena. Science doesn't deal with supernatural phenomena. We give that to the philosophers. We give that to the theologians. That's not in the realm of science. And understand, science is just one way of knowing. There are many important realms of human inquiry that are equally important. Science is one way of approaching our world, but it's one way of approaching the natural world, not the supernatural world. And if something has a scientific explanation, it explains what is observed with reference to natural law, not supernatural intervention. So, for instance, and some of you have heard me say this before in my previous presentations, a good example might be what happens when your child says, Mommy, Daddy, where does lightning come from? You don't conjure up images of angels bowling. You talk about positively charged and negatively charged clouds emitting their electrical energy when they come together. When a kid asks you about rainbows, you don't conjure up images of little men in green suits with brass buckles and pots of gold, right? You discuss how water in the atmosphere acts as a prism and separates out the components of white light. That's a scientific explanation of our natural world, and that's how science has to operate. We explain phenomena that we witness using the laws of physics, biology, chemistry, paleontology, cosmology, not cosmetology, cosmology, mathematics. Okay? What does foundation have to do with this? Okay? Science must also be testable. You have to be able to test any conclusion, any statement in science. And therefore, it has to be potentially falsifiable. It doesn't mean you have to falsify it, otherwise we'd never get anywhere. We're saying you have to have the potential. How about if I tell you that as scientists, we believe that the amphibians evolved before the mammals? Okay, well, nobody was here to see it, but is that testable? Sure. Can we go back and look at the fossil record? Sure. Is it potentially falsifiable? You betcha. If we find mammals in the fossil record before the first amphibians, we just falsified that claim. So it has to be potentially falsifiable. If you can't test it, it falls into some other belief system, into theology, philosophy, etc. Conclusions are tentative, pending additional information. Whoa, wait a minute. You're going to tell me how it is until you change your mind? Yeah. Isn't that cool? Okay, right? That's a little different than the ostrich in the sand, right? We used to tell you that electrons had predictable orbits. Whoops. Whoops. Flip-flop. Yeah. Whoops. We'll let that one go due to the neutral environment of this meeting, okay? But what we're looking at in electrons, did that destroy atomic theory? No, it changed some of the nuances. We used to tell you in biology that membranes were rigid structures. Whoops. Does that destroy cell theory? Of course not. So when we get new information, we modify it a little bit, but it doesn't necessarily cast doubt on the theory. And we have science is self-correcting. And so why should I listen to you as scientists? After all, you guys came up with the Piltdown man, didn't you? Remember the Piltdown skull? That turned out to be a hoax. You know, it was a human skull and an orang, jaw. What about this bird called not Archaeopteryx, but Archaeoraptor? We'll talk about that tonight. A couple of years ago, National Geographic came up with the great missing link between birds and reptiles. Oops, it was a hoax. The good news is, who is it that's dispelled all these hoaxes? Who's said, wait, look at this. This isn't true. It's always been scientists, right? It's not been the journalists. It's been the scientists who say, whoops, we weren't quite on course on that one. And science is cumulative and progressive. We keep building upon those who've gone before us, right? The old adage that we see so far because we stand on the shoulder of giants. Okay, the scientific method. Folks, take a look at this. Notice how I've said ideal? Here this comes a little shock to you. The old scientific method never reared its head until a textbook was printed in about the 1950s. I can see some textbook author going, okay, now, I've got to put this so the students can understand it. How about a bullet format? And he came up with the whatever, I don't know how many, 5, 6 he came up with. And the thing just hasn't died since then. It gets, you see it in every textbook it's there, and sometimes 6 steps, sometimes 8, sometimes 9. It's not like they tattoo that on you at your graduate ceremonies. What it is, it represents an ideal that we try and strive for. because sometimes you'll see it in 5 steps, sometimes you'll see it in 6, depending how we join those. The point is, this is the ideal that we work for. I'm a lowly evolutionary ecologist. Okay, I work on sea turtles. My God, I have tried to get those sea turtles to cooperate in a controlled environment. Okay, you sea turtles are going to live on this half of the reef, and there'll be no going over there. Okay, and if I catch you, I'm sending a shark. They just won't listen. I can't do a control. But you strive and get towards a controlled experiment. And a lot of science fields, you can't do experiments. Can we do an experiment to see why volcanoes erupt? Okay, can we do an experiment to find out why the dinosaurs went extinct? No, because a lot of fields of science are historical in nature. Geology, paleontology, cosmology, evolution, and even many fields of anthropology. They're historical sciences. You can't do controlled experiments. But if all goes well, you try and approach this. The first thing you do is make observations, right? You look at the world around you and go, whoa, that's interesting. Step 2, you ask a question. I wonder why my lawn is all brown and my neighbor's lawn is all green. Okay, so next one, formulate a hypothesis. You learn everything you can about the topic. You learn about how to grow lawns, and you come up with a hypothesis, which you try and test. Once you test that hypothesis, using experiments with controls, we don't have time to go into controls. I think most of us are familiar with that concept. We then come up and we analyze the data. Okay, here's the data we've collected. What does it mean? So we do then, we come formulate a conclusion. Based upon the analysis for our data, we take a look at whether we're going to accept our hypothesis, whether we're going to reject it, and then it goes through peer review. We disseminate the results, we cash in on big bucks, and we retire in the Caribbean. It all works that way. I'm still waiting for my plane ticket to the Caribbean. But this is the ideal that we try and strive for. Now let's see how it actually happens when we start looking at how science can be done. What we're going to do is look at how do we evaluate scientific claims. I was told this, I was told this. Push comes to shove, do I flip a coin? What do I do? Well, first thing you want to find out is the experimental design, is it really appropriate for the question being asked? For instance, question number 1, is the sample size large enough? The mantra that they do tattoo on your forehead in graduate school is sample size, sample size, sample size, sample size. Size does matter when it comes to doing research, okay? Because you say, okay, what does it matter? Well, if I want to find out let's take a look at Gallup polls, for instance. Gallup polls, which we hear about every day now, don't we? Do you know the sample size for Gallup polls, folks? Are we talking 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000, fractions of a million? It's right around 1,200. It's right around 1,200. So you say, well, does that really represent the 265 million people, 75 million people living in the United States? We probably would say, well, probably not. Now, statistically, it's considered accurate and significant, but whoa, wouldn't you feel a little more comfortable with a larger sample size? I mentioned, too, that I work on sea turtles. I work on diet and feeding ecology of sea turtles. Everybody before me would go out and capture these poor little turtles and then make them vomit or get something out of their stomach and go, wow, this is what a turtle eats. And the sample sizes were 2, 3, 4, or 5. The largest study was like 12. So we drew conclusions based upon what green sea turtles eat around the planet based upon sample sizes of 12. Are you comfortable with that data? Probably not. Wouldn't it be nice to have a larger sample size? Because, of course, we get closer to reality when we have a larger sample size. Question number 2, is the sample representative? Okay, take a look at this group in here. Very, very diverse group, isn't it? So if we want to ask any political, social question of this group, I can probably guess what the answer is going to be. Is this really the representative sample that we want in this room if we want to find out what Grand Rapids thinks? If we find out what Western Michigan thinks? If we want to find out what Michigan thinks? Or if we want to find out what the nation thinks? Is this really the representative sample that we want to be doing? No, it's not. So it's one thing to say, ooh, I have 1,000, I have 1,200 people. Yeah, but if they all come from Billy Bob, Texas or something, then, whoa. I mean, if Billy Bob, John Ray, and John Boy, the hog farmers, are the only ones in the survey, we probably want a more diverse representation in there. So sample size is important, but who's in that sample size is also important. Of course, that should be what? Random, or do we choose? It should be random, right? It should be a completely random sample. Does the equipment or the experimental design influence the results? For instance, double-blind studies, so important in psychological studies. I mean, for instance, even in medical studies, if I want to find out if pill A has any effect, and I'm going to give this front row, some of you are going to get the placebo, and others are going to get the real drug. So I go up to you and say, here you go. And you go, is this going to help me? Because you all have real diseases, don't you, right? Okay. and I got a big smile, hey, I give it to you, and a big smile, and I give it to you. Frown when I give it to you, my man, okay, and a frown and a smile, okay? At the end, I say, so how did it make you feel, okay? There's a little chance that I'm going to get more favorable responses from the people that I get the smiles to. How about Jane Goodall studies? What did Jane Goodall do with her chimpanzees all those years? She lived with them, which was a huge change in studies because you didn't interfere with your subjects, because would her presence, in fact, maybe change the results? Yes, and if you can't correct for that, you may not be getting true results. So it's important to understand that, the equipment or the design may interfere with that. The classic example that's been used in science education is, what happens if I go out to Lake Michigan and I say, I'm going to sample for the size of creatures here in Lake Michigan, and I go out with a net that has a 4-inch mesh on it, and I go out for 10 years, and I sample every day. And at the end of 10 years, I say, my God, I've gone out every day for 10 years, and I've caught up a zillion different things. I have a huge sample size, and I've done it completely randomly, and therefore I can say without question there are no creatures in the lake less than 4 inches. Wrong conclusion, right? Because what biased my results? The equipment that I used. So sample size is important, representative is important, but also the equipment and how you design it is also important. Now, is the experimental design appropriate for the question? What do we do here? Okay, here we go. Number 4. And by the way, we may have a couple technical problems here because this was done in a new version of PowerPoint, and this computer has the old version of PowerPoint on it. Question number 4, what do we do here? Okay, so let's go up to the next one here. Now, making observations. This is where class, you have to pay attention here. Is it easy to make observations? It's a no-brainer. I can do it. You just open your eyes. Well, let's see how we're doing here. Okay? Can you always believe what you see? How many of you, first of all, see the sunrise every morning? Good. Ixnay with the raise, okay? No. Okay? Has the sun ever been rising in the sun once in your life, in the sky once in your life? The sun's not rising. What's happening? The earth is turning. It appears that the sun is rising. But I saw it. It must be true. Yeah, if you have light skin, you also have blue blood, right? And I always love this. My students come and say, well, why don't you bleed blue? Well, my high school biology teacher told me that's because as soon as you cut yourself, oxygen gets it, and it turns dark red. It's like the light in the refrigerator problem, okay? You say, we'll never know, okay? Well, yeah, you will. You withdraw in a vacutainer, like when we draw blood. When's the last time you gave blue blood? Any Smurfs in the group? Okay? No, of course. But you say, well, I see it. It's blue. I see this. Well, really? Just because you see it doesn't necessarily make it true, okay? Quiet. Shh. Describe the picture content. Take a look at it for a second. Okay, how many people see a face, a single face? Raise your hand. Hey, look at that, a big chunk of the group. How many of you say 2 faces? How many went out for drinks ahead of time? Hey, it's the same people that have the 2 faces, okay? Can you see what's happening here? Let's take a look. If you see the single face, we have, of course, the right eye, we have the left eye, we have a single nose, we have a single mouth, we have a little page boy haircut. If you see the 2 faces, look what's happening. There are 2 profiles facing each other. Here's your face on your left, here's the profile of the nose, here are the lips, here's the forehead of the other one. Look at that, and look, a little candlestick up here for whatever reason. So what is it? You are all looking at the same picture. Okay? You came up with 2 different conclusions. That was a fluke, wasn't it? Okay, who sees Bill Clinton playing the saxophone? Who sees a silhouette of a woman? Okay, who sees a silhouette of a woman playing the saxophone? Okay, let's take a look at our saxophone player. He's in profile. Here's his nose. Here's the saxophone, his hand. Here's the bell on the saxophone, his pant leg, his shoe, his butt, his shoulder, the back of his head. You see it? Yeah, I see it. Yeah, sure you do. Okay, yeah, okay. Now let's take a look at the woman. There's her left eye, her right eye. Here's her nose. Here's her mouth. Here's her chin. Here's her neck. Yeah. Right? You got it, right? Okay. Which direction is the book facing? Is it open towards you or is it open away from you? Come on, you're a learned group. My God. Oh, that's the politically correct answer, but you can't have it that way, okay? Well, everybody's looking at it the same way. I mean, we're making the same observation of the same material. Why are we coming up with different results?
I need more information.
Do you? See, after all, you're going to go, just stop it. Get your foot off my jugular, Greg. Okay? Okay. Who sees an Eskimo? Who sees an Easter Island head? Who doesn't care to participate because your head hurts? Okay. Let's take a look at the Easter Island head. It's a profile to your left. Here's the hair. Here's the forehead. Here's the nose. Here's the chin. Here's the mouth. Here's the neck. And then the ear. You with me? Now, if we take a look at the Eskimo has his back to you. Here's his hood of his parka, which is up, facing away from you. Here's the furry. Okay, here's his left shoulder, left arm, back of his parka, both of his legs, his shoe, his front arm is raised with his parka, and he's going out his little igloo door. Ooh. Ooh. Half full, half empty. Okay. Okay. Compare the size of the inner circles. Which one's larger, A, B, or the same? You willing to bet next month's income on it? You want to get the yardstick out? Yeah, there you go. Same size. But we're all looking at the same thing. Let's take a look at another one. Which vertical line is longest? I don't want to be wrong anymore. Make the madman stop. Okay? They're the same, aren't they? Spirals or circles? We're all looking at the same observation here, folks. How many for circles? How many for spirals? How many are waiting for Vitalis in the drink? Okay. Circles. They're concentric circles. Are all the small lines parallel, equally spaced? See where the arrow's pointing? Those lines? Are they randomly spaced on the different lines, or are they all equally spaced? Equally spaced. Okay, if you don't get this one, I can't help you through it. This is like rolling your tongue. Either you can do it or you can't do it. Who sees the senior lady? Who sees the young woman? Okay, let's take a look at the senior lady first. You have a left profile. Here's her head, her hair. She's wearing a scarf with a little feather in it or something. Here is her nose, very large nose. Her eye, a little jawline. Here's her mouth. Here's her chin. And she has a cardigan sweater up around her. Yeah, sure, okay. Okay. Yeah, sign this check. Okay. Now let's take a look at the woman, the young woman. She's like this. She's turned with her head back, looking like this. Here is the feather. Here's her hair once again. Here's her ear. This is her eyelash sticking out. Here's her left cheek coming down here. Her chin coming up here. Her thin neck with a little necklace. Here's her blouse coming up this way. And a cascading hair coming down. As I said, it's either roll your tongue or you can't. I can't help you out. There'll be a class afterwards for you people who are a little slower on this process. Okay? But we're all looking at the same thing. Two faces or a wine goblet? You can see the two faces in profile looking at you, or you can see the wine goblet coming up the center. Are these red lines wavy or straight? Don't anticipate. You're bringing bias into your observations. They're straight. They're parallel. You can get a yardstick up there, and they're exactly parallel. Okay? How many people see a skull? How many people see a woman at a cosmetics table? Okay, I think that, yeah, say what? Okay, let's take a look. Let's do the skull. Here's the top of our skull. Here's the left eye socket, the right eye socket, the nasal cavity. Here are the teeth down here and the jaw. Now let's take a look at the woman at the cosmetics table. Here's the back of her hair. She's wearing a bouffant. I know that word. Okay, bouffant. Okay. She's looking at a reflection in the mirror. See her eye, her nose. She's looking at here are all her cosmetics down here. Here's her shoulder. Here's the table. This is a very old one called Vanity. It's a very famous. Many of you have probably seen it before. So it's a little disturbing, isn't it? Okay. Horizontal lines parallel? Really? You think those are parallel? You're right. They are. The horizontal lines are parallel to each other. They're exactly parallel. Okay? So it worked, right? It's over. You guys stink. Okay? Consider a business career, real estate, something like that. But, how is this possible? Because, you have to learn how to make observations, don't you? So even scientists who try and do this correctly, it's hard sometimes. It's very hard. You say, okay, I've learned how to make observations. Okay, can I now go to the next step? Can I make deductions and inference based upon those observations? Well, let's see. Okay, you just got a grant. A couple of you folks who are in my biology class, you sat through this with me. It's kind of a fun exercise. Okay, you just got a research grant. You do your first year and your dig. You spend all of your grant money this year digging up these footprints. And now at the end of every year, grant year, this is the worst part about doing science, you have to tell the people who gave you money what you have discovered. Okay? And then what do you always do in the last paragraph of every grant report? You ask for more, because questions remain to be answered. Okay, so what's happening? Describe what's happening in the set of tracks in the mud. Uh-huh.
It looks like somebody dropped something, like a popsicle.
Okay. Okay, so what do we have besides popsicle options? Anybody see dinosaur footprints? Okay, so what's happening in the dinosaur footprints? We have two tracks, don't we? How much you might explain, deduce what happened here? You got to make it sexy because you want to be refunded for next year. Okay? Don't go, there are two, Okay, well, you have a big dinosaur and a little dinosaur, same species, different species. One of them started to run. How come? Okay, well, yeah, look at that. See where they're wider apart down here? So we have one of them that started to run. Why do you suppose it started to run? Because it saw the other one and decided lunch is being delivered? Dinosaur dominoes being delivered?
In the fossil record, how do you demonstrate the difference between 5 minutes and 500 years?
Well, because they're in the same strata. They're in the exact same strata. The exact. Yeah, because we had one of our field flunk. Oh, yeah, fits. Yeah, it's clean. Good one. We may rehire you for next year. Okay. Well, how about over here in the cheap seats? What do you think? Come on. We have a big guy who's running after the small guy. Why is he running after the small guy? What do you think? Okay, well, maybe there are dinosaurs called duck-billed dinosaurs and other things. How about you folks up there in the bleachers? What do you think? Oh, good. Okay, and we're going to ask for that in a second. But you haven't convinced me as your granting agency. Big deal. You have two sets of dinosaurs. What else you think? So they're coming towards each other. Are they separate species, the same species? Different species? What's that? Oh, yeah, maybe they're running away from each other. Maybe they saw each other and they ran the other way. But this one was speeding up here, right? This one didn't increase its pace, did it? Look at that, equally paced. And this one, look at that, started to run. Maybe to eat the other one, do you think? Which one? Yeah, maybe this one, because you guys saw Jurassic Park. Remember the velociraptors? Nasty little guys. They didn't have to be bigger to be nastier. Maybe this one went, whoa, mama, I'm out of here, okay, and started to boogie on out of there. So what are we going to do? We're going to ask for more grant money for next year. We spend all next summer digging up another set of tracks. I guess our story's changed a little bit, okay? We have a little more data. We're making different deductions and inferences here, aren't we? So now what are we going to say? What are we going to tell our granting agency? Let's let somebody else give it a try. What do you think?
Yeah, they were wearing red shoes and they started dancing.
Dancing dinosaurs?
No, they're not dinosaurs. They're just wearing weird shoes.
Okay, but you know what? We forgot to tell you that these prints are 65 million years old before Adidas and Nikes were on the block. Okay? What do we think over here? They're fighting, okay? So they got together and they're fighting. What's another option besides fighting up there? Ooh. Oh, so maybe we have a mother or a father reuniting with the youngster. Maybe there's no consumption here whatsoever. How about back up in the way in the bleachers, the tree people?
Same species, male and female. We need more money to find a nest.
Ooh, so maybe we have male and female. So what are they doing over there? Making nice, right? They have little cigarettes afterwards we might find fossilized over here, right? So maybe they're getting together. Maybe it's male and female, and maybe they're mating over there. But look at the footsteps. Does it look like they're casually passing each other? They might be mating, or they might be doing what besides mating? You suggested it before, eating each other, right? So what do you have now? You either have two different species or the same species. You have either the bottom one running away or the top one running away. You either have male and female mating or two species eating each other, or we have dinosaur dancing, was it? Let's look at another option. Second, hun. We get more money? Uh-oh. Extend the two previous reports. What are we going to interpret now? We only have one track going away. What'd you say? So it was dinner. You're happy? Okay, so maybe one of them, the big guy, ate the little one? Are you happy with that? Should we publish? Are we ready to go? We made our observations?
Sure.
Are there all... Ooh. Isn't it common for a lot of animals to carry their young on their backs? Maybe now it's being carried on the back, walked away. Maybe they're both still alive. Maybe it wasn't mating at all. You sickies, always thinking the lowest denominator in sex, okay? Maybe it had just paternal love, and mom's carrying the baby away. Do you have another one? Es posible, no sé, okay? What else could have happened? How do we account for just one set of tracks? If you're not hopping on the back and you're not getting eaten, what else could happen? A pterodactyl flew away. Maybe they're going the other direction. Are you sure they point in the right direction? What makes you think that the toes are all pointing to the right? What, are you that familiar with dinosaur foot patterns? What's another thing that could have happened? Why might we only have one set of footprints going off on the right? Maybe because the one on the other one went north over a hard substrate, and the fossils didn't imprint. Or soft. You see, there are different ways to interpret the same data, and we were also sure. And as we got more data, we kept changing our views. Okay, let's take a look here then. Let me get past this. I want you guys to describe this scene. Wait a minute. Just don't say it out loud. I'm going to choose someone. Okay. What do you think? Young men in the black in the front here. What's happening here? Yeah. Okay. Is it over a lake? Is it over an ocean? Or a river? There are no waves. Okay, you're qualifying enough. Most people jump right away when you bring an observational bias. You go, this is sunset over a lake, because we live on the West Coast, right? In fact, this is sunrise over the Sea of Cortez. So you brought in your observational bias, didn't you? Could be a photo of a painting, but then we could ask, okay, then the painting is of what? My point is, what would be, what's the subject matter? But you're right. Well, let's take a look here. Describe the scene. Use what you've just learned. Badlands of where? Okay. Utah? Detroit? I mean, could it theoretically be, could it be buildings? Who wants to go for sunset? Any sunset folks? Any sunrise folks? How about sun low on the horizon folks? Haven't we adequately described the position of the sun without committing ourselves? Do we... hang on. We're getting to you. Okay. Now, do we know that this is desert for sure? No. You're victims of many John Wayne movies. Do you see any plants? Do you see any lizards with sunglasses? Okay. You're saying, well, I'm familiar. There's topography like that in the West, and that's pretty arid, but you don't know, right? About all you can do is say, sun low on the horizon in an area of high vertical relief. You go, oh, come on, that's copping out, Forbes. Anything else beyond that is extrapolation beyond your knowledge base, isn't it? Hang on, let me get to another one here. Okay? Jason, talk to us, bud. What do we have? Pine trees? What time of the year? Ooh, good. Most people jump right in and go, mountains, pine trees, winter. No, midsummer, Canada, fir trees. You brought in your observational bias again, and that's a dangerous thing when we get into science. Here you go. Now what do we have? Ground zero and whatever, that's a tough one, okay? Now, how do you interpret the data? Once we learn how to make observations, once we know how to make deductions and inferences from the data, we're not done. The fun is still continuing here. We still have all these little minefields that we can step into, okay? How to interpret the data, or what does it mean, or lying with statistics? Okay, here you go. What does it mean? In 2000, the Centers for Disease Control reported that 25 breeds of dogs were involved in 238 fatal dog bites in a 20-year period. More than 50% of the deaths were from pit bulls and Rottweilers. Okay? So what does that tell us about pit bulls and Rottweilers? Okay, that could be it. They could have owners who train them to be aggressive, or what's another alternative? They're used in fighting, and so they're trained by the owners, or is the pit bull and the Rottweilers? Remember, they're not killing other dogs, they're killing humans. These are human deaths. These are human deaths. So why are these two breeds so aggressive? It might be the owners, or it might be what? It might be the breed. And which one, is this enough information to say that one breed is more aggressive than the other? Isn't it possible that 49% of the deaths came from pit bulls and 2% came from Rottweilers? Wouldn't that make it more than half? Right? But it really changes the perspective, doesn't it? I couldn't find the citation from the Grand Rapids Press. Several years ago, 2 years ago, we had a big to-do in Grand Rapids about several lakeshore communities wanted to ban pit bulls because of several deaths that had occurred. And the Grand Rapids Press, above the fold, had an article that said, and I forget exactly what the numbers were, so I'm making these up a little bit here, but it had the number of dog attacks in, I don't know if it was Kent County or Western Michigan, by breed. And German Shepherds had, once again, I'm making the number up, but it was something like 7, 8, 9-fold the number of attacks compared to pit bulls. The take-home message for the article is, what breed should be outlawed? The pit bull or the German Shepherd? German Shepherd had 7, 8 times as many attacks. The data is clear, isn't it? There you go. What's the most popular breed of dog, probably, now in one of the most popular? German Shepherds. Wouldn't we expect more attacks if you have 20, 30 times as many German Shepherds? Well, yeah. So when you adjust the data for the number of German Shepherds owned and the number of pit bulls owned, German Shepherds are puppies compared to the pit bulls and the Rottweilers. But that information wasn't given to you. So you have to say, wow, it's data. It's good. It must be true. Well, you need more information. Oh, I love this book. Okay. The Case for Marriage by a sociologist and a psychiatrist. Being unmarried chops almost 10 years off a man's life. Now, when you read this book or you listen to their interview on NPR, their take-home message is it's the love that keeps you alive. Okay? It's the love that keeps you alive. It's the love and the bond that keeps you alive. And it could be, right? It could be. They could be correct. Is there another way to explain the data, though? What other reason might you have? I'm not ignoring you. I'm just trying to, these other people are just slacking off, and I'm trying to get them going here. Okay? What's another reason you might live longer? Okay? But what they were looking at, they did adjust it for percentages, okay? So when we look at the percentages, what's another reason you might live longer if you're married? We like to call that positive reinforcement, okay? Dodge that one, okay? So maybe, come on, exercise, eat right, get some more sleep. It may be completely independent of the love. That might just be that relationship that does that. Yeah, go to the doctor. Guys don't tend to want to go to the doctor, okay? So, get to the doctor. It may be independent of the love aspect. So we need to say, well, maybe this is correct. Maybe it's because of love. But you need to look at the other ways to explain the data. And they don't really do that in this book. And they continue to say that married people are less likely to abuse alcohol than unmarried people.
People who abuse alcohol are less likely to get married.
There you go. Because when they go, "Oh, you marry me?" people say no, So, yeah. Was there another option here? That could be part of it because, of course, it's expensive, being an alcoholic. And so maybe that money is going somewhere else. Or maybe it gets back to that support independent of the love as to why you're not going to be an alcoholic. You're not going to be an alcoholic in my house. I hate you. I wish I'd never married you. I wish we were divorced. But I'll tell you, until that happens, as long as you're living in this house, you will not be a drunk. Got it? Independent of the love, isn't it? Okay? So there might be other ways to explain that data. And here's another one here from the same book. When it comes to avoiding misery, a wedding band helps. No personal testimonies here. No, ixnay on the testimonies here, okay? But now, is there really another way to explain that data? Well, here's what they didn't look at in their book. It turns out those that were most happy prior to being married showed the least increase in happiness after marriage. The marriage and the love had nothing to do with it. People who were happy before getting married did not show any significant increase in happiness once they were married. People who were in relationships with extended families, with close friends, showed the same on the happy index. There is one, okay? On the happiness index as those who were married. So they could be completely independent results. The data, wow, this is a huge sample size. It's representative, and it's real live data. Yeah, but is there another way to explain the data? This is out of New England Journal of Medicine. A study of Seattle women, 10,000, that sample size counts. That's huge. 10,000 women found that women that filled 25 or more antibiotic prescriptions over a 17-year period had 2 times the risk of developing breast cancer compared to those who didn't use antibiotics. So if you used antibiotics and you were a Seattle woman, okay, you're one of those 10,000, okay, you have 2 times the risk of getting breast cancer compared to somebody who doesn't use antibiotics regularly. What's your take-home message? Don't use antibiotics. Move out of Seattle, okay? If you use more antibiotics, you increase your risk of breast cancer. And this was the NPR report, kind of left it at that. The journal article went beyond that.
Okay, diet. We won't get breast.
Yeah, okay, possibly. Okay, nobody's suggesting that you don't use the antibiotics. But the popular press reports that cover this left it at this. If you use antibiotics, and I remember the nightly news, that they lead in, use of antibiotics doubles your chance of breast cancer. Now, and that's pretty much what the story said. But if you read between it, the authors did go beyond that and look at other things. What might account for that increase in breast cancer besides the antibiotics? Voila. Maybe the reason you're taking antibiotics so regular is because you have a compromised immune system, which increases your chance of cancers. What else? You are just you know this all. This is good, okay? What's another chance? Could be environment. Maybe living in Seattle has something bad there. Well, let's take a look. What does it really mean? Well, it turns out, if you don't take into account here, that cancer may have compromised the immune system. We got that one, necessitating the antibiotics. So the cancer had nothing to do with the antibiotics. It was the compromised immune system. Some chronic conditions, such as inflammatory diseases, may have made the tissues more susceptible to both infection and cancer. So there may be some other disease that's making the individual more susceptible to both the antibiotic treatable diseases as well as the cancer. And also, antibiotic users in the study were older than the non-users, and therefore were more likely to be in the breast cancer age group. Does taking antibiotics increase your risk of cancer? Not necessarily. It may, but we need to rule out all these other options. But when you listen to the nightly news that night, people were casting off their antibiotics and, I don't want breast cancer. Okay? Here you go, USA Today. The number of inmate-on-inmate assaults in all state prisons has risen with the number of prisoners. So in 1999, we had 925,000 prisoners. We had 23,000 assaults. Look what happened in 2000. The number of prisoners went up, and my God, look at the number of assaults. The article went on as a justification of why we should build more prisons, because after all, if they get more crowded, you have more prisoner-on-prisoner assaults. You look at the data. You go, okay, let's build some more prisons. Well, let's look at the data. If you actually do the percentages, what was the percentage change between the 2 years? 2.6% went up all the way to 2.7%. Is that statistically even remotely significant? No. There was no change between those years. No change whatsoever. But when you read the article, oh my God, we need to build more prisons. There's a higher risk of death in state prisons than in federal or private prisons. The article went on and said, look at this. In state prisons, we have a higher risk of death in state prisons. Well, yeah. Look how many state prisons there are nationally. They didn't say percentage of inmates. They looked at total deaths. So when you have 3,000 state prisons, I'm guessing that we have a higher propensity for having more deaths in those prisons. But that's not mentioned in the article. So you have to kind of wade through the data. Okay? Grand Rapids Press. When it comes to accidents, seniors are involved in far fewer accidents than young adults. What's the take-home message? Who do we want to regulate? The seniors or the younger drivers? The younger drivers. Because it tells you right here, seniors are involved in far fewer accidents than young adults. You don't believe it? Take a look at the data. Here's the data. Ages 65 to 102. Whoa. Okay? 44,000 crashes, 6.5% of the accidents, or what do we have here? Fatal crashes, there we go, 212. So percent of total, 6.5%. Look at the age group 16 to 24, the group on the right. Okay? Look at that, 23%. 23.6%. There is the data. So they gave you the data. I keep saying, where's the data? Here's the data.
Where's the road miles, Brad?
Ooh, we need more information, don't we? You need to know how many miles were traveled. Who's going to travel more miles? That 16 to 24 group or the 65 to 102? The 16 to 24. So when you normalize this data for number of miles driven, who has the higher incident rate? The 65 to 102. Exponentially so. Exponentially so. But you have to normalize the data, don't you? But they gave you the data. Ooh, it must be true. Not that we should trust the 16 to 24-year-old drivers, but okay. So what happens when we look for relationships? Oh, let's take a look. Causation versus correlation. Okay, here you go. Bread consumption, health, and behavior. More than 98% of convicted felons are bread users. This is true. Yeah, this is true. Okay. Look at this. 50% of all children who grew up in bread-eating households score below average on standardized achievement tests. This is true. Have I ever lied to you all the time we've known each other? No, look at this. This is real data. In the 18th century, when virtually all bread was cooked in the household, the average life expectancy was less than 50 years old. Yeah, it's true. More than 90% of violent crimes are committed within 24 hours of consumption of bread. It's amazing we even let Panera sell the stuff, isn't it? Okay. Bread is proven to be addictive. Subjects deprived of bread and given only water beg for bread and water in as little as 48 hours. Bread is often a gateway food, leading the user to harder items such as peanut butter, jelly, and sometimes even cream cheese. Most American bread consumers are utterly unable to distinguish between significant scientific facts and meaningless statistical babble. In the 1980s, it was determined that there was a correlation between the number of VCRs sold and the incidence of felony crime. There was. If you plot this data, as VCRs went up, there was an exact correlation to felony crime. So what? Buy a VCR? Become a criminal. The data was there. I saw it. I couldn't find my graph. A study of 3,000 Europeans that were breastfed as babies determined that these individuals had an average IQ points and points over those non-breastfed. So what? If you get breastfed, you become smarter. Ladies, there you go. Stop selling blood. Start selling breast milk. Okay? You know, it's the new brain food. Is there another way to look at the data? Who's more likely probably to know that breastfeeding is important for their child? Possibly somebody who has a higher IQ, somebody who has been educated, and this study has been redone, and guess what? When you standardize the data for IQ levels of the parents, there was no significant increase in the IQ in the children, right? The parents knew enough to breastfeed. There was a decrease in West Michigan bank robberies, Grand Rapids Press, okay? A decrease in West Michigan bank robberies, which numbered only 7 last year, a 56% decrease from 2001. Robberies fell statewide for the second consecutive year. What could be the cause? Well, the article goes on to tell you that in the same period, the concealed weapons permit were issued to all that qualified. Remember 3 years ago? If you had a heartbeat, you can get a concealed weapon. Okay? So the article's chanting, it's worked. Concealed weapons has cut down bank robberies. Look at that, to only 7 this year. There's the data. I guess we need to look at what happened to felonious crimes and bank robberies nationally. Guess what? It decreased in all states, even if you didn't have a concealed weapon law. Were they cause and effect? No. Was there correlation? Yeah, but no causation. What's a correlation? An apparent relationship between two variables. What's causation? An established relationship. Too often what we see in the news is correlation, not causation. Okay, so let's draw some conclusions. We've learned how to make observations. We've learned how to make deductions and inferences, right? We've learned how to avoid some of those minefields. Well, let's see. How do we draw conclusions? Okay, Occam's razor. Many of you know this. Occam's razor says that when two hypotheses will explain the data equally well, you err on the fact of going with the one that's easier, that's simpler, right? The one that's less complex. Now, does that always work? No, but many times, if you go for the easier explanation that explains the data equally well, that usually is the right one. You don't have to have this robust explanation. We've paraphrased this now. Instead of calling it Occam's razor, it's what? It's the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. Right, okay? Don't necessarily develop these really elaborate explanations when a simpler one will explain the data equally well. Does theory influence observation and conclusion? Here we have Stanley Pons and Fleischmann, who in 1989 announced to the world that they had conducted cold water fusion, literally in a baby powder blue Rubbermaid kitchen basket. Okay? Now, did they really see what they thought they saw? No. They were so positive that this was going to work. When they looked at their data, they saw data that no other laboratory on the planet was capable of replicating. So we have to be careful. Did you have bias? Did you have theory that was influenced by your pre-established conclusions? And we all do this, folks. I mean, it's all part of human nature. But you have to say, is this data that's coming across like that? Here you go. Archaeoraptor. Okay? It turns out here that in the October 1999 issue, that was the cover on National Geographic. National Geographic Society wet their collective pants and said, we do it. We have it. We have one of the quote-unquote missing links in the transitions between reptiles and birds. By the way, birds are reptiles now. There's no longer a class AVs, so they're just glorified reptiles. Okay? But we're still looking for those transitional groups. And they go, we found it. This is it. This is more important than Archaeopteryx. They did a whole issue to it. They produced a 55-minute video. They had this statue in the main foyer of the Washington, D.C. headquarters, and then they decided to get it validated. It's a composite fossil. It's glued from 2 different species. It's a forgery out of China. They so desperately wanted to have a missing link that they forgot to say, well, let's step back and take a look at this first. And everybody, in fact, nobody would publish it. Even Nature and Science wouldn't publish it when they got it. So National Geographic published it themselves. Nature and Science said, no, we're not going to publish this. Some of you have seen this before. Errors in drawing conclusions. Fallacy of false alternatives. A couple of you have seen this before with me. What has 4 legs, wags its tail, buries its bones, and barks? Is it option A, a cat? No. Is it option B, a bird? No. So it must be what? Option C, a fish? Uh-oh. You assumed it wasn't A and it wasn't B, therefore your only alternative was the last one, right? Well, really, it's not option A, B, or C. It's really option what? D, none of the above. We so often fall into, well, if science can't explain it, therefore it's the alternative explanation. No, there could be a none of the above, or there could be an option that we haven't discovered yet. Don't get sucked in if it's not option A. It has to be option B. Peer review. Pons and Fleischmann did something that we've never seen in science before. Instead of going to peer review, where your colleagues in the field evaluate the quality of your science, your data analysis, your experimental design before it gets published, you're supposed to go to peer review first, then you go to the public. They went to their patent attorney first, then they went to the public. Come and think about it. If you can patent cold fusion, are you a happy camper? Oh, Bill Gates looks like a pauper. Okay, so not necessarily a bad call from an economic standpoint, but a violation of science. And as a result, they wound up looking pretty goofy because, of course, it really didn't happen. Nobody could do it. Had they gone to peer review, it would have been another way. It would have worked another way. Evaluating scientific claims. Okay, is the claim fringe think? People always say, Forbes, there really isn't a flat Earth society. Okay, there's the website. Okay, it's flatearth.org. Yes, they exist. They say that the spherical Earth that we've seen in photographs, and we have the evidence, really isn't happening. It's a cover-up conspiracy by the government. Well, that's fine. But you know what? It's the fringe element that has the burden of proof against the most commonly accepted explanation. We say, wow, we're willing to entertain your evidence, but the overwhelming evidence that it's spherical. You bring us evidence to the contrary, we don't need to prove to you anymore. It's established, it's widely accepted. What's the validation of the source? You know, who's really making the commentary here? Can the source and the reliability of the data be verified? Look at that boy. I love this guy. Okay? You know, you see this and you say, well, come on, nobody in this room is going to believe this. Folks, I have neighbors, I have friends who swear that they're aliens in a garage somewhere in Texas, okay? A lot of America believes this because, after all, they couldn't publish it if it wasn't true, right? Okay? The learning pyramid. For you teachers in the group, this is what they teach you in Teaching School 101. They say, now, when you're teaching, understand that if you have the students actually teach each other on the bottom, they'll remember 90% of the material. If you lecture up at the top, apparently they remember nothing, okay? If you have them read it, they remember 10%. If you have audio-visual, if you have pictures, they'll learn 20%. And we've been teaching teachers, and still today, use this as our standard and tell them how to teach. I thought, being the perennial skeptic, gee, I wonder where the original literature is. It doesn't exist. Nobody ever did the work. This is just dogma. There is no data. Now, your gut feeling is it's probably not far off. Maybe we change one or two of them. We're certainly going to change the numbers, but nobody has ever done the science. Same thing with placebos. Did you hear this here? PhD student wanted to go back and look at the original research on placebos. Nobody ever did a controlled study to find out if placebo effect is real or not. We know it is now, but we just assumed it was, and everybody's been using placebos. Good thing we were right, okay? You have to verify the data, right? I mean, are you going to believe a Bigfoot photo nowadays? Are you going to believe alien photos anymore? Of course not. Let's make sure that the data you're giving me is in fact true. How well does the claim fit existing data? In the black and white illustrations, we have perpetual motion machines. It violates the laws of thermodynamics. You can't tell us there's a perpetual motion machine because that really tinkers in a big way with the law of thermodynamics. We just can't accept that. How about the Flat Earth Society? How about down here, that humans and dinosaurs walked together at the same time? How about over here that the Grand Canyon was caused by a cataclysmic flood in 40 days and 40 nights? It flies in the face of all of the other data. And so, does it fit all of the rest of the existing data? No, it doesn't. There's a ton of evidence to suggest that these cannot happen. Consider the source. Okay? Are you going to believe that smoking doesn't cause cancer? Well, the smoking industry told you that for a long time. Versus the CDC that says, well, you're not going to look like Joe Camel over here. You might look like Joe Camel over there. Who are you going to believe, right? Before you listen to data, could there be motive? Vioxx in the news. Watch Newsweek in Time this week. I'm sure it'll be a cover article. It turned out that apparently Merck knew about the cardiovascular consequences during the initial approval process. When they submitted the original article for publication, it was the referees who said, wait a minute, look at all this cardiac data. But Vioxx said, we didn't know about it ahead of time. Merck said, we didn't know about it. Well, there could be motive. We have to wait and see what happens here. But sometimes you have to consider the source. Has refutation been sought? You say, I'm giving you an amazing claim. What you should say after that is, see if you can disprove me. And you commonly don't see that. That's what we do in science. Trust me, folks, you biologists all want to accept evolution because you don't want to rock the boat. You know what? Do you know how rapidly I would be God in the biology field if I could refute evolution? Talk about making a career, mama, okay? When the big patriarchs and monarchs of the field come crumbling down, you're famous. So what you want to do is say, yeah, try and disprove me. The James Randi Foundation, that many of you know about, has a $1 million prize. If under controlled conditions you can prove mental telepathy, if you can bend spoons, if you can prove ESP, if you can use Dowager sticks to find water, you get $1 million. It's been offered now for about 20 years. You don't have Uri Geller coming and saying, please see if you can do this. Evaluating science, are the conclusions appropriate for the data? When we see these other examples we've talked about, they came up with scientific conclusions that weren't appropriate. Is there evidentiary convergence? This is important. What does this mean? When you look at, for instance, evolutionary biology, you have evidence coming from virtually every single field of science and mathematics provides evidence to substantiate evolution. If you look at an alternative theory, do you have the same type of evidence all pointing to the same explanation? So the point is, does all the data point to the same explanation? And as it does, that makes a scientific theory more robust. Are alternative scientific explanations offered or only rejection of the accepted explanation? Is the scientific claim that's being made saying, hey, I have a better idea, or just saying, don't believe that? Because in good science, you say, I don't think this is correct because here's some data to show the contrary. Does the new explanation explain as many related phenomena as current explanation? When Alfred Wegener came along with continental drift, it explained things that we had no idea were related before. That's a powerful scientific theory. Are personal biases and beliefs present in the claims? In anthropology, in a big way. We have the Leakeys in the top right-hand side. You have Donald Johanson down here. Every anthropologist in doing hominid evolution, human evolution, do you want to find the youngest recent fossil or the oldest fossil? You want to find the oldest fossil, don't you? And when you look at the initial papers that come out, everybody has the missing link. Is there a little bias in their interpretation? Sure, because if you can find it, you're doing well. Even Alfred Wegener right here. His original plate tectonics, continental drift theory, wasn't accepted because he had a lot of bias in there. Are results repeatable under controlled conditions? Uri Geller, the Israeli spoon bender. You know, Uri, come and bend your spoons under controlled conditions, and I will be your toy for the rest of your life. Okay, I will follow you everywhere. I will be your patriarch of your salvation. Please, you know, do this. But can you? If you have an amazing claim, amazing claims require amazing evidence. Okay, last thing, use your spam filter. Okay, be careful here. Beware of diploma blindness. As soon as you have a PhD, for some reason, you're assumed to have credibility. Okay, we know what BS stands for, right? We know what MS stands for, more of the same. We know what PhD stands for, piled higher and deeper. Okay, so you know, how often do we go in a physician's office and the physician says, we need to amputate your left arm, but I came in for a cold. Yes, well, okay, you have the degree. No. Don't be blinded by the diploma, right? Ask those questions. Just because you have a bunch of diploma doesn't necessarily mean that you're right. You may have a higher propensity for being right, but don't have a diploma blindness. Fallacy, redundancy, circular reasoning. Okay? We get into circular reasoning. Okay? What is gravity? It's a tendency of objects to move towards each other. Why does that happen? Because of gravity. Right? It's a fallacy of redundancy. We need to get out of that loop. Ad hominem. Discredit the claimant and discredit the claim. As many of you know, I do evolution education classes, and commonly have people say, well, you know, Darwin at the end of his life, or Alfred Russel Wallace at the end of his life recanted. It doesn't matter if they did. This isn't about the person. It's about the theory. Discrediting the person has nothing to do with this. It's the theory. Great guys, we love them for it. The theory is independent of them. But we commonly see attacks on the claimant to try and discredit the claim. Proof comes from positive evidence in support of a claim and not the lack of evidence for or against a competing claim. Angels, you say, can science substantiate the existence of angels? Or the lack of angels? Well, no. Aha, so there are angels. No, nor can we address Santa Claus and reindeers. Can you prove that Santa Claus doesn't exist? Oops. Okay, that Santa Claus may or may not exist, and that there are reindeers? No, we can't. Aha, so there are. No, it's like life after death. You know, does science say there's life after death? We can't address that. It's not testable. We give that to the theologians. We give it to the philosophers. You say, so what you're saying is that there is life after death? No, we're saying we can't test it. So you're saying there isn't life after death? No, we can't test it. So just because we can't disprove reindeers doesn't mean that there are flying reindeer. Okay? Rumors don't make reality. That boy gets around. He's everywhere. He's nationally. You know? It's like urban legend, right? I understand that some woman got a fried rat when she went to KFC instead of the chicken, right? It's urban legend. Just because you repeat it 1,000 times doesn't make it any more credible. Data, data, data. Rumors don't make reality. I teach anatomy physiology. This week we're doing the skeleton. Okay? Said, students, okay, the thoracic vertebrae have ribs on them. How many thoracic vertebrae? 12. How many ribs? 12. How many in men? 12. How many in women? 12. But there's a different story out there, right? If we believe that Adam's rib was taken and created Eve, shouldn't we have one less rib on the men? Okay? And I've mentioned this to you before, I had a secretary call me up once. There was actually a bunch of secretaries. Dr. Forbes, we have a question for you. How many ribs do men have? 12. How about women? 12. In the background here. I don't believe it. And so, okay. So I happened to be over in the office a couple hours later, and they're still fighting. Okay, and I go, whoa, 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 whoa. And they said, okay, we need to settle this. I said, well, you can come over and look at our skeletons if you want. And say, well, and the woman says, well, you guys make those skeletons. You add the extra rib. I go, we have 4 cadavers that are dying to meet you. You can come and count them in the cadavers. Okay, I don't care. Okay, well, what are you going to do? Okay. Unexplained doesn't mean inexplicable. We couldn't explain lightning originally. We couldn't explain rainbows. We couldn't explain the tides. We couldn't explain volcanoes. We couldn't explain the 2-headed cat. Okay? We can now. Okay? We couldn't explain genetics. We can do that now. Just because we can't explain it now doesn't mean we won't be able to in the future. Bold statements don't make true claims. First page of Dianetics. The creation of Dianetics is a milestone for man, comparable to his discovery of fire and superior to his invention of the wheel and arch. Mama, that's a bold claim. Doesn't make it any more true, does it? And their last one, diction doesn't replace data. Using science-sounding terms, calling something, for instance, creation science, doesn't make it science. Here's one out of the Santa Monica newspaper. Let me read this to you. This planet has been slumbering for eons, and with inception of higher energy frequencies, is about to awaken in terms of consciousness and spirituality. Master of limitation and master of divination use the same creative force to manifest their realities. However, one moves in a downward spiral and later moves in an upward spiral, each increasing the resonant vibration inherent in them. Say what? I can read it 30 times and it doesn't get any clearer, but it sounds pretty darn scientific, right? A wolf in sheep's clothing is still a wolf in sheep's clothing. As consumers of science, we have to be careful. We have to separate the nonsense from all the other stuff. And hopefully now when you guys read your local newspaper, you listen to the nightly news, and they have the statistics, and they have the PhD, and they have the sample size, and they have the pictures, you'll be a little skeptical. You'll be conditionally skeptical. Say, well, maybe I'm willing to believe it, but once again, incredible claims require incredible proof. Thanks for putting up with this. Okay.
Okay. We have about 10 to 15 minutes for a few comments and questions, so who would like to go first?
Do you think that it would be a good idea to have a required course in elementary statistics in the same manner that we have a requirement for civics?
Absolutely. We flirt at our colleges. A lot of campuses do all the time with requiring a principles of science class. How do we read graphs? How do we understand statistics? And how do you basically be a consumer of science? There's a classic book from the 1970s that everybody, politician and everybody should read called Lying with Statistics. Very good. You can make the data say whatever you want. And so, yeah, you need to understand because, we're a database society. So absolutely, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I have a question on dogs and cats, if you don't mind. It's a little off. Except for size, there's only one species of dog. Yeah, they can all interbreed except for size.
Correct.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Does that include wolves and foxes? Or are they separate?
It includes wolves, coyotes, and dingoes, and dogs are now all the same species.
Okay. Now, when you get to cat...
No, you go, wait, I have a problem with that. Wait, a St. Bernard and a Chihuahua gives you no problem, but a wolf and a dingo do? Yeah, they're all the same species, yeah.
Yeah. So now we go to the cat family, okay, and there are many varieties and species of cats. Now, but I remember a Scientific American article about the cheetah, okay, and there's only one clone, I guess it is, of cheetah. Is that right?
It's called a sibling group. What we're referring to is cheetahs used to range all the way from North Africa to South Africa. Now they're remnant populations. When we look at the gene pool existing in cheetahs, they're so closely related genetically, they're almost as close as being siblings to each other. that's bad, because if we have a disease that comes into the population that gene pool is susceptible to, we could lose all the cheetahs.
Okay, that was my question. Is there a higher incidence of recessive gene manifestation, detrimental, and so forth in cheetahs?
Well, in all life forms. The reason we say that you shouldn't breed with your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, besides the social mores against that, is because you increase the likelihood of an undesirable recessive trait coming out in your offspring. Folks, if you breed with your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, and certainly I'm not advocating that you do such, so don't write letters, okay? But you don't come out with two-headed children, okay? And people think, well, you're going to have a mutant. No, you're not. If you have a very clean genetic history, there's nothing to worry about. Once again, not advocating the practice, but it's just if you have an undesirable recessive trait, you have a higher chance of it coming out. Michigan is actually one of the few states that makes it illegal for you to marry your cousin. So get that right out of your mind.
So if these are all siblings, these are all healthy siblings, presumably, with very few detrimental recessive traits. I mean, that could be a possibility of why we can still breed these cats so well.
Yeah, but when we talk about desirable characteristics, it's desirable characteristics for this environment at this time, which could change overnight.
That's right.
Because we saw in the same range, we saw African hunting dogs, which used to be all over East Africa. In 1987, 88, rabies was accidentally introduced into the population, almost extinguished the entire population throughout Kenya, Tanzania, Sudan, and Somalia. They're still barely coming back. So they were perfectly adapted till the new pathogen came in.
What about the internet? I've seen things people showing me things that look like scientific papers because they're typed up nicely and they've been all spell checked and everything.
Sure. Yeah.
And they're unbelievable. It seems to me it's very dangerous that people see that. I mean, it's a purveyor of information, but it's also a purveyor of phony science.
And some people might say that, well, it's always been that way. You've always had a chance to go to magazines and books. Well, not true, though, because magazines and books have usually editorial staffs who at least try and explore the content. On the internet, open up your own blog site, open up your own web page, and put whatever you want. And we struggle with this with our student papers all the time, is that, why are you believing that this is true? My son right now, who's in 10th grade, is doing a debate class on Rwanda. He has to come up with 60 literature citations. So he has to go to 60 separate sites and come up with data. The thing he's got a lot of sites, of course, that are very biased. It's quite obvious this isn't real information. That's a problem. You have to wade through the data. And getting back to this gentleman's suggestion, shouldn't we have a class that tells you not only how to look at data, but how to wade through the literature and decide what might be accurate and what might be inaccurate?
Following up on that, I wanted to ask about something that's online right now, the rumor that's going around about the bulge on Bush's back. Have you seen that picture? It looks like there's a pack or something that was on the back of his coat, and then you wonder, well, was this picture touched up, or was this? I got an email today. There was an article today that was showing that it could be that he was not being coached on what to say, as much as maybe they were keeping it for security reasons, that in case he had to quickly exit the building or something else was happening, that then they could contact him, that he had a little earpiece in.
Right.
So do you have any more information about this, or we're just going to sort of wait and see whatever happens?
No, I just heard about it. But you have to be careful on what you see.
You did hear, yeah.
You have to be so careful on the photographic
That's
evidence.
right.
If you go to you ready for this one? GetFunnyPhotos.com. You'll wet your pants, okay? It's all of these touched up photos, and you look at them, and there's some Photoshop expert. You look at these, and you'll just cry laughing, and it's you name it. And there's a photo on there that you swear has to be correct. So yeah, photographic evidence doesn't cut it anymore. We saw our cow swimming with the dolphin up here. I'm still convinced it's true. That's how you get milkshakes.
I know someone's having all of their amalgam fillings pulled out because some science and they showed me a thing on that. But I wonder if it seemed like it was pretty inconclusive.
Yeah. The question is, and not being a dentist, but having a couple dental friends, because I also have them and looked into that. And you have some incidents of some of the leaching of the mercury and things like that. But the question is it worth compromising the structure of the tooth, and what's your risk factor, especially as an adult versus a child? But yeah, you have to go back and look at the original data. Like with the these COX-2 inhibitors, the Vioxx and others. Boy, you saw what happened to the stock market. They just crashed. So we have to find out how much of this is true data, how much of it is nonsense, and then make those decisions. And it's a hard thing to do. But the good news is, we have with the internet, the good side of that is we have the ability to do this nowadays. We have one more question?
how can you falsify a nuclear reaction, even if it's cold water? You know,
Oh.
it seems you see what I'm saying.
Yeah. The question is, in Pons and Fleischmann, how could they make that mistake? Because it's been what, 15 years now. What were they looking for? They weren't looking for glowing water in the bucket, of course. They were looking for subatomic particles, because they weren't trying to produce a full reaction. Obviously, it's bad for the Rubbermaid container. So they were looking for other subatomic particles. They weren't trying to produce a full reaction. So I don't know what telltale signs they were looking for, but they were so convinced that they were going to find it that that's what they found. And nobody else on the planet was even coming close. They're still in business, by the way. Last I heard, 2-3 years ago, they're working for Toyota. They're set up in a full lab in Brazil, continuing with nuclear fusion. Think about it, folks. If you're Toyota and you can patent that process, do you own the world?